September 29, 1941. On a crisp autumn morning in Kyiv, Ukraine, thousands of Jewish families gather their belongings, following German orders to assemble near the cemetery at the edge of the city. They've been told to bring documents, valuables, warm clothing. They believe they're being resettled. Within 48 hours, 33,771 men, women, and children will be systematically murdered in what would become the single largest mass shooting of the Holocaust. This is Babi Yar, the grandmother's ravine, a sprawling natural gorge that would become the epicenter of what historians now call the Holocaust by bullets. Unlike the gas chambers of Auschwitz that would come later, this was face-to-face killing on an industrial scale. No cattle cars, no distant camps. The victims walked to their deaths, often within sight of their homes. Yet despite its staggering death toll, Babi Yar remains largely unknown to Western audiences. Deliberately erased from history by Soviet authorities, denied proper commemoration for decades, and overshadowed by later atrocities. The city on the brink. Before World War II, Ukraine's capital was home to one of Europe's largest Jewish communities, approximately 160,000 people, representing nearly 20% of the city's population. They were doctors, teachers, craftsmen, artists, deeply integrated into the cultural fabric of Ukrainian society for generations. When Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union in June 1941, about 100,000 of Kyiv's Jews fled eastward or were conscripted into the Red Army. Those who remained were predominantly women, children, the elderly, and the infirm, those unable to escape. On September 19, 1941, German forces captured Kyiv. Within days, a series of explosions rocked the city center, destroying German headquarters and killing several officers. The mines had been planted by retreating Soviet forces, but the Nazi leadership immediately blamed the city's Jewish population, providing the pretext they needed for what they had already planned. The German occupation authorities, led by SS Standartenführer Paul Blobel of Sonderkommando, quickly posted notices throughout Kyiv, ordering all Jews to report at 8 a.m. on September 29th near the Jewish cemetery. The notices stated that Jews failing to appear would be shot on sight. The announcements claimed they were being resettled for their own protection. This was the beginning of what Father Patrick Desbois calls the Holocaust by bullets, a systematic campaign of mass shootings that would claim approximately 1.5 million Jewish lives across Ukraine and the occupied Soviet territories between 1941 and 1944. Into the mouth of death. As dawn broke on September 29th, columns of Jewish families began moving through Kyiv's streets toward the assembly point. Many brought suitcases and bundles containing their most precious possessions. Some wore multiple layers of clothing, anticipating a long journey. Children clutched toys. Parents carried infants. The elderly leaned on canes or were supported by relatives. Olena, a Ukrainian bride celebrating her wedding that day, recalled the moment when a friend of her mother's shouted from a German military truck, "Olena! Olena, save me!" The woman was never seen again. By mid-morning, thousands had gathered at the collection point. German soldiers and Ukrainian auxiliary police checked documents, separating non-Jews who had mistakenly reported. The massive crowd was then directed to walk along Melnikova Street toward the Jewish cemetery and the Babi Yar ravine beyond. What happened next was described by Dina Pronacheva, one of the very few survivors. Each time I saw a new group of men and women, elderly people and children being forced to take off their clothes. All of them were being taken to an open pit where submachine gunners shot them. Then another group was brought, the ravine of no return. The Germans had prepared meticulously. At the entrance to Babi Yar, a series of checkpoints was established. First, the victims were forced to surrender their valuables and documents. Then they were ordered to remove their outer clothing. Moving deeper into the ravine, they were compelled to remove all remaining clothes. The naked victims were then channeled in groups of 10 toward the edge of the ravine, where they faced a wall of German soldiers armed with machine guns. The shooting was continuous, methodical. Bodies tumbled into the ravine, many still alive, creating layers of dead and dying. Children were thrown in alive to save bullets. Some victims were forced to lie directly on top of the bodies of those just killed before being shot themselves. The efficiency was terrifying. According to German records, 33,771 Jews were murdered in just 2 days, September 29th and 30th. The killers worked in shifts, pausing only to eat meals prepared by local residents or to drink vodka to dull their senses. In the evening, they held what one police order called evenings of camaraderie, with music and more drinking to erase the impressions of the day. F.M. Vilkes, who later escaped from a Nazi work detail, described the aftermath. Here at Babyn Yar, there were pyres, there was stench and stink. We were forced to pull out and, under threat of execution, stack the corpses on the stove. The ravine itself seemed to breathe for days afterward. Witnesses reported that the earth moved as those buried alive slowly suffocated beneath the weight of corpses and soil. The living and the damned. What makes Babi Yar particularly haunting is that it was not hidden. Unlike the remote death camps built later, this massacre occurred on the outskirts of a major city within sight and sound of ordinary citizens. Ukrainian engineer Fedor Fido described what he saw. Many thousands of people, mainly old ones, but middle-aged people were also not lacking, were moving towards Babi Yar. And the children, my God, there were so many children. All this was moving, burdened with luggage and children. Some cry, others console. Most were moving in a self-absorbed way, in silence and with a doomed look. It was a terrible sight. Local residents were often requisitioned to assist. Some dug the pits beforehand. Others filled them afterward. Young men collected clothing. Women sorted valuables. Children gathered firewood for the German soldiers' evening meals. Nina Rufimovna Lisitsina, who was just 2 years old when her family was taken to Babi Yar, somehow survived the massacre. When I regained consciousness, it was nighttime. I grabbed onto the roots of the trees to get out of the ravine. The killing at Babi Yar did not end after those 2 days. For the next 2 years, the ravine continued to serve as an execution site for Jews who had been in hiding, Roma people, Ukrainian nationalists, Soviet prisoners of war, and others deemed enemies of the Reich. By the time the Red Army liberated Kyiv in November 1943, an estimated 100,000 people had been murdered there. Blueprint for genocide. Babi Yar represents a pivotal moment in the evolution of the Holocaust. It marked a transition from selective killings of Jewish men to the indiscriminate murder of entire Jewish communities, men, women, and children. What happened in those 48 hours would become the template for hundreds of similar massacres across Ukraine and the occupied Soviet territories. The Holocaust by bullets predated the industrialized killing of the death camps. In many ways, it was more intimate and psychologically taxing on the perpetrators. Soldiers could see their victims' faces, hear their pleas, witness their final moments. This face-to-face killing took such a psychological toll on German troops that Nazi leadership eventually sought more detached methods of mass murder, leading to the development of gas chambers, For decades, the Soviet Union suppressed the specifically Jewish nature of the Babi Yar massacre. The first monument erected in 1976 made no mention of Jews, instead commemorating Soviet citizens killed by German fascists. It was only after Ukraine gained independence in 1991 that a menorah-shaped monument was finally erected to acknowledge the Jewish victims. The erasure continued in other ways. In 1961, Soviet authorities attempted to fill the ravine with industrial waste from a nearby brick factory. The dam collapsed, causing a mudslide that killed at least 1,500 people in what became known as the Kuranivka tragedy, another layer of death at this already blood-soaked site. Today, competing narratives still surround Babi Yar. Some emphasize the specifically Jewish tragedy, while others place it within the broader context of Nazi atrocities against multiple groups. These tensions reflect Ukraine's complex relationship with its Holocaust history and the ongoing process of reckoning with both victimhood and collaboration. Buried truths, unfinished graves. In 2022, during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a Russian missile struck near the Babi Yar Memorial Complex. President Volodymyr Zelensky, himself Jewish, asked, "What is the point of saying never again for 80 years if the world stays silent when a bomb drops on the same site of Babyn Yar?" His question cuts to the heart of why this history matters. Babi Yar is not merely a historical footnote. It represents the moment when genocide became industrialized, when killing on an unprecedented scale became methodical, bureaucratic, and routine. The ravine itself is gone now, filled in and built over. Today, the site is a memorial park where visitors stroll, often unaware they walk above mass graves. The physical transformation of the landscape mirrors our collective amnesia about this chapter of history. Yet the voices of Babi Yar refuse to be silenced. Through survivor testimonies, witness accounts, and the painstaking work of historians and organizations like Yahad and Unum, we can now reconstruct what happened during those 48 hours in September 1941. As Father Patrick Dubois observed, we cannot build a modern Europe, and perhaps a modern world, above thousands of mass graves of Jews who have been killed like animals, buried like animals. The Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers and crematoria. It began with bullets, ravines, and the silent complicity of ordinary people. By remembering Babi Yar, we honor not only those who perished there, but also confront the uncomfortable truth that genocide doesn't require elaborate infrastructure, just human beings willing to look away as their neighbors disappear.